Hi, my name's Nicholas Brash. I'm the Festival Director of Melbourne Jewish Book Week. And as you well know, we bring you the very best in Jewish writing, themes and ideas, both in person and in the virtual world. And it is lovely to have your company for this evening's special gala event, Fake It Until You Make It. Like so many people and events around the world, this event has been hugely impacted by the devastating COVID-19 pandemic. We planned the event for last year, but of course, with so many national and international guests, we quickly realized that this event will be impossible to create as a live face-to-face gig today. So we've reimagined it for you using the video technology so many of us are now familiar with. And we're still taking you around the globe with the help of this technology and the internet. The idea for this event and its theme, Fake It Until You Make It, can be taken so many ways, and you'll find out that our guests certainly have done that. And speaking of our guests, we could not be more proud and excited about the range of Jewish creatives we've gathered together for tonight's event for you. We gave them carte blanche to create an original piece based on our theme. So what you're about to enjoy is a wild and, well, riveting ride. It will make you laugh, cry, think, and everything in between. Just one last thing before we get started. Tonight's event has been a long time in the making. And in order to include guests from around the globe, you'll notice that each of our guests was recorded at a different time. It's a bit like recording the tracks on a music album over a year to make sure each song is at its very best. For those of you that remember music albums, of course. We've never done anything like this before, but I think you'll agree tonight's show is a sensation. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our host, our MC for this evening, Ginger Gorman. She's a social justice journalist, a podcast host, and author of the book Troll Hunting. Hello, Ginger.
Nicholas, it is so lovely to be here. What an honor.
Look, you were one of the guests that we had planned to have at our last festival live and until COVID intervened. Just wondering whether the restrictions and boundaries of COVID made you feel more or less creative and inventive with your work.
I think like a lot of us, Nicholas, I was at home alone thinking, and what I thought about was community and how so many of us reconnected with our community, just doing small things like dropping food off to people and checking in with people. And I was thinking and writing a lot about empathy and about compassion. And one of the most interesting things about tonight is a lot of our guests have delved into this area as well. If you keep an ear out, you'll hear many of them thinking deeply about what it means to be human and how we empathize or don't empathize with each other.
They do indeed. And as I said before, there's such a wonderful range of the type of pieces that we're about to hear. But look, before we introduce our guest, Ginger, I'd like to pass over to you actually to do the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Nicholas. I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the first Australians, whose lands, winds and waters we now all share, and pay respect to their unique values and their continuing and enduring cultures which deepen and enrich the life of our nation and communities. The Ngunnawal people are the traditional custodians of the land on which I am sitting now. I pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. I also pay respect to the peoples of the Kulin Nation, who are the custodians of the land where Nicholas and the Melbourne Jewish Book Week team reside. And furthermore, I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. I commit to acknowledge and understand the historical and contemporary disadvantage experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the implications this has for the different types of work that we all do. I am grateful for and acknowledge the strengths, capacities, abilities, and contributions that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make to wider society. I acknowledge the land which we are on now is unceded Aboriginal land. Particularly today as well, in the light of this gala event, I acknowledge the strong tradition of storytelling of the Ngunnawal people and the peoples of the Kulin Nation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ginger. Now, we didn't just get you to host this event. We also asked you, like the others, commissioned you to write a piece for tonight. And the piece that you've written is about imposter syndrome. Are you someone who experiences this syndrome?
You know what? I often feel like a fake, and I have experienced imposter syndrome my whole life. So this event is actually a chance for me to write and think more deeply about that.
And as someone who also suffers from it, I look forward to hearing it now. So let's get stuck into the first of tonight's many wonderful pieces.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Over to you.
So the other day, I turned up at my friend's house really to drop something off. And I was on the way to a speaking event, really pressed for time. And keep in mind, this person wasn't really a good friend of mine. Let's say she was a friendly acquaintance. And she looked at me and she exclaimed, "You're always so well put together." And honestly, I nearly laughed out loud because literally half a minute earlier, I had been driving too fast because I was running late, and I'd been smashing on my makeup at the traffic lights and also like spraying deodorant under my armpits while I was driving. And I've got to be honest here and say this is a pretty regular occurrence for me because I'm a single mom, I run 2 businesses, and a lot of my work is at irregular hours. So it's pretty hard to keep the balls in the air. And also, this is not a safe practice, so I don't recommend it. So in this moment, behind the wheel at the red light, I grabbed my really cheap mascara and I noticed that the name of this product was actually Fake It. And this moniker emblazoned on this little black tube in my hand at that time seemed like a message for life. Then, because brains work in mysterious ways, I got this show reel in my mind of every single time in my life I've had imposter syndrome, which is really often. One of the images I had of myself was in Norway in 2019. And this was the year that my book about cyber hate, troll hunting, that Nicholas just mentioned, came out. Now, you never know if anyone's going to read anything you write, especially a book. But my book became a bestseller. And then I got invited to speak overseas a number of times, including in Norway. I was standing there off to the side of the stage in this huge stadium and wearing this cute little red dress and a headset microphone, about to go on and give my talk. And there were about 800 people in the audience, educators from across Scandinavia, waiting to hear me speak about how to make the internet safer. At that time, the expertise I was about to share was really critical for Norway because a man had just tried to copy the Christchurch massacre outside Oslo. And I understood a lot about how and why that had happened because of the work I had been doing. However, it's crazy how our minds work, right? I looked up at all these bodies sitting on 2 tiers of seating above me, and my heart was racing. I felt a little bit dizzy, and I thought, what am I even doing here? I'm just a fat mum who usually wears bad tracksuit pants, a bad headband. Don't they know it's just me? I can't do this. Needless to say, I did it anyway, but I will get back to that in a few minutes. Now, hands up if you've ever suffered imposter syndrome. In the unlikely event you've never heard of this before, this is the internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. There are loads of different studies about imposter syndrome and how common it is in the population, but some studies say that up to 82% of us have experienced this at some point. Some studies also suggest professional women get it more than other groups. And some people have even said to me it's both a feminist issue and a class issue. However, from the reading I've done, it is actually really common across all genders. But having said that, some research does show that people in marginalized groups may experience imposter syndrome more. So I'm certainly not discounting those important nuances there or the structural societal prejudices which might cause them, but I also don't feel like that's my story to tell tonight. Getting back to imposter syndrome, you might experience, if you've got imposter syndrome, perfectionism and diligence, overworking, undermining your achievements, feeling phony or fear of failure, discounting praise. Sound familiar to you? And you might have thoughts like, I must not fail, I feel like a fake, I just got lucky. I definitely have these kind of thoughts. I don't know about you. And loads of really accomplished people have confessed to having imposter syndrome. Albert Einstein, Michelle Obama, Nick Cave, Jacinta Ardern. We could go on and on here, but I think you understand the idea. As someone who experiences imposter syndrome often, I've been interested in this for a really long time. And I'm often wondered, where does it start? I remember really early in my life suspecting I was a bit crap. In about the second grade, I really distinctly recall hearing my teacher telling my mother that I was academically a plodder. I found it a bit of a challenge to learn to read. I was a bit overweight, and I was always picked last by my peers for sporting teams. As a 9-year-old, I returned to Australia from England and I had an English accent, actually a North London accent. And I was picked on endlessly for that. It was nearly impossible to make friends. And I've got this memory that I'm going to share with you, kind of almost as therapy. I had these special pencils with my name printed on the side of them in gold, and my mum had given them to me for my birthday. And one kid in my class broke every single one of them in half. So I can imagine that many of you have your own versions of these childhood anecdotes. And just as a funny little aside, when Melbourne Jewish Book Week asked me to host this event, it also gave me imposter syndrome. I looked at the incredible guest list for tonight and I thought, don't they know it's just me? As an adult, I spent most of my journalistic career from 2001 to the start of 2015 inside the ABC. And quite contrary to what most people might imagine, many parts of the ABC are actually rife with sexual harassment and bullying. Although I will say I was mainly bullied by other women. And in that environment, women were really pitted against each other. This was definitely an environment where imposter syndrome thrived and was almost encouraged. There's a paradox here, though, because people often tell you that imposter syndrome is crushing. And if you believe the popular press and the self-help movement, self-esteem is seen to be the cure-all for this ill. But how can that possibly be? I actually don't have great self-esteem, and yet here I am. And I suspect if most of us were honest with ourselves, we'd say this too. We have achieved what we've achieved despite our self-doubt, not because we don't have any. Also, I personally don't buy into the neoliberal idea of hugely high self-esteem and thinking you're the greatest. Does that really solve all of our problems here? I think not. Have you ever heard of what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect? So we all know someone like this and we hate them. This is where a person thinks their abilities are way above what they actually are. Puke, right? Jerk. We hate them. Basically the opposite of imposter syndrome. And as fellow humans, we do not like this in other people. In 2017, I was invited onto a lunchtime panel for a federal government department. It was an event that was part of a speaking series designed to assist women's careers. On this panel with me was an expert psychologist talking about imposter syndrome. And her view was that imposter syndrome was damaging. And she'd written and edited this whole book about it. And I quote, the book was about resilience, eroding personality types such as imposterism and perfectionism. I made a comment on that panel that I was actually quite grateful to have had imposter syndrome. And in fact, it was responsible for my whole career thus far because as a plodder and a mediocre academic achiever, it had made me try a lot harder to become a higher achiever. The psychologist responded that my behavior was maladaptive. And I still laugh about this today because, like, imagine being told in front of hundreds of people that you're a basket case. But moving on. When Melbourne Jewish Book Week told me the theme of this event, I started mulling this over in my head. And I threw out a question on Twitter and Facebook that went like this. So here's a question. Can imposter syndrome ever be useful? Has it been for you? The first thing I want to say is that everyone wanted to respond to this question. It knocked my socks off a bit, actually. My tweet got more than 42,000 impressions. And then I got invited onto ABC Radio to talk about it. And the responses were so interesting. As you might expect, some people obviously said imposterism is never helpful. It is crippling and destructive and stops people stepping up and coming forward. But then there was this whole cohort of other people who responded in a much more nuanced way. These folks told me imposter syndrome helps them achieve and drives them to be their best. One person even said that admitting to others that you've got imposter syndrome actually creates connections between you and the person who you're telling. And so if we just get a little bit meta here for a second, that might be what I'm doing tonight, right now. A lady called Carrie said it really helped her to know it was so common. Another woman called Lucy said she loved managing people with imposter syndrome. And this is a quote from her. It is associated with being highly conscientious. As a manager, I found it much easier to manage people with imposter syndrome than the ones who think they're better than they are. It also encourages reflection, which so many overconfident people don't do. So, imposter syndrome can help us avoid complacency in certain circumstances. However, that's not the whole story. The CEO of the Canberra charity Men's Link, Martin Fisk, responded to my question like this. It can keep you humble. It does for me, but it is always a fine line between that and just straight out anxiety. So along a similar vein, another person said, it is a slippery sucker. And I guess this is a point where I really stopped to think, where is the tipping point here? What's the point at which imposter syndrome stops making you humble, stops making you strive, stops allowing you to use your talents and abilities, stops you speaking out, and instead becomes toxic and crushes you? From the reading I've done on this, imposter syndrome at its worst can have really damaging implications. Victims can develop anxiety, stress, low self-confidence, depression, shame, severe self-doubt. That is obviously bad, but a bit of imposterism might be okay. So to wind up here and head straight into the middle ground, let's choose to challenge ourselves. If we accept that a bit of imposter syndrome can stop us being a jerk, but too much is crippling, what can we do in those moments when our inner critic is killing us? Mentoring from a person you trust and leaning on your support network, listing your own achievements in your brain. I wrote that bloody book. I actually am an expert. And changing your language. So my friend Jamila Rizvi, feminist and writer, wrote a book called Not Just Lucky. And one of the things she's pointing out is that your achievements are not just luck. You earn them. So don't say, I'm lucky, or only, or preemptively apologize. Own those achievements. Instead, say, it was hard, but I did it. I want to end here with some really great advice from my friend, Dr. Kirsten Ferguson. She is a leadership expert and a commentator and is on many boards. And she also used to be in the Air Force. Her response to my question about whether imposter syndrome can ever be useful was this. I suspect you will find all successful people, however you define success, experience imposter syndrome. The secret is hearing the thought, recognizing it for what it is, and continuing on anyway. I think that skill in and of itself helps people stay resilient and persevere.
Thank you, Ginger. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And now that you've shown and proven that you're an expert in imposter syndrome, you will be asked to speak on that. It's like this never end. It's like a mirror, isn't it? It's, you know, when you see a whole series of mirrors going from one to another, a never ending story. Thank you.
My first guest is Elise Esper-Hurst. She's a Melbourne-based writer and playwright. Elise is currently working on a play commissioned by Melbourne Theatre Company, and it's called A Very Jewish Christmas Carol. And she's also working on her first novel. Now, Elise, I was reading a little bit about your play, and I was thinking there's a level of faking it in the play because Jews don't usually celebrate Christmas.
True. It was actually quite hilarious how it came about. I was actually making Christmas lunch for my husband's family, And there were a lot of different factors at play, and one of them was that my brother-in-law was very sick, and so it was kind of like trying to make the Christmas just amazing, but without being too Christmassy. So there was like not going to be a ham, obviously, and I was asking my friend who I'm writing the play with at the time. This was before we knew it was going to be a play. Should I hide the Judaica? I had the Hanukkah out and all of that stuff. And so, it's kind of how it came about, the two of us kind of joking about it. And then it was like, oh, maybe this is a play.
Did you end up hiding all your Jewish items around the house, your menorahs and things? No. How did it go? Did it go well?
It did. It was actually a beautiful day. And of course, my parents came. And so it was, it was a little bit Jewish, a little bit Christmassy. And I wanted to do karaoke and no one was up for it. So, I don't know if that's a Christmas thing, karaoke, probably not.
Don't you think this is like the great beauty of Australian society? It's all kind of mashed in there together, all the cultural and religious stuff.
Yeah, totally. Everyone gets a little bit of everything. So it's nice.
Well, I can't wait to see your play. It just sounds hilarious and brilliant. But on the subject, or faking it until you make it, you've written this wonderful piece for us, which I related to hard. So could we hear it now?
Yeah, sure. My husband is a better person than me. Back before he is my husband, back when his career takes him overseas and back again, back to a time when I always drop him at the airport and always pick him up again, back to a time when I cry as he leaves and the sex on his return is all we will talk about when we run out of other things to say. Back. Back then it is night. He's heading to China. I am dropping him off at the airport. And Annie, a cantankerous golden cocker spaniel, sits in the back. My tears are forming on cue as we follow the arrows to the drop-off point. Departures. My heart is departing. My bed is half empty. My phone has 10% battery life. We pull up and get out of the car. The boot is opened. The suitcase threatens to roll off the curb and he slams it forcefully on its back. I'm about to say something about his biceps when we see a woman crying and distressed. She has a round face and is wearing a soft green tracksuit. She also has a suitcase, but it has no wheels. It is fat and wide and cumbersome and brown. She's standing next to it and her voice is getting louder. She's saying to a passerby, "Please, help me." It is hard to ignore, though I want to. I want to cry and kiss my then not husband with my wet face. "We should help her," he says. "Oh, okay," I say. What I do not say is that standing next to her suitcase, I think she looks like a fallen tree. He is a better person than me. We go over to her. She is asking the passerby, a man, to please take her home. She has forgotten her passport. She cannot afford a taxi. The passerby looks as though he's considering it. I don't want her to get in the car with a strange man. Neither does my then not husband. "Should I take her?" I say to him, so he almost can't hear. "Yeah, you should," he says. "Really?" I say, ready to walk away. "You can do it, can't you?" he replies. "You think I should really drive her home and back again?" I'm waiting for him to let me off the hook, but he leaves me there, dangling with my mouth open, and nods as if it's no big thing. And he knows all I'll be doing is going home with the dog to the half-empty bed and knocking myself out with whiskey and the laugh track of a 90s sitcom. "I can take you," I say to her, and as quickly as I do, the passerby disappears. "Thank you, thank you," she repeats over and over and watches on as me and my then not husband share a quick embrace, not the usual drawn out just one more kiss scenario. He heaves her big brown suitcase into the boot. It turns out that she is on my then not husband's flight. She wipes away sweat from her top lip with the sleeve of her green jumper and says to him, "Can you tell them I'm coming? Can you tell them to hold the plane for me?" She has never been to China before. She's never even been overseas before. She has a grown daughter who helped arrange the trip, and there is a distant aunt waiting for her at an airport in Shanghai, or so she thinks. She left the passport out by the cordless phone. She left it there on purpose so she would not forget it, but she did. I ask for her address when we are already driving in the silver Hyundai i30 my parents bought for me. The flight is due to leave in 90 minutes and there is no time to spare. I live in, she's so stressed she can barely speak. Cross Street, she says, Footscray. I pass her my phone with the map open and say, can you type your address in here? She fumbles around with it nervously. She's not good with smartphones. She doesn't have one herself. She can't really see without her glasses. She doesn't know where her glasses are. The phone begins dictating directions. She relaxes somewhat and tries to lean back towards the back seat and give the dog a pat. Annie growls in return, as she does with everyone, and I tell her not to be offended. Maybe she would like a snack, she says, reaching for her backpack. Oh no, I say, she's fine. She ignores me and begins unzipping the bag. I didn't know what I'd get on the plane. Here, I've got some steamed chicken and carrots. Dogs like that, don't they? No, I insist, keep it. As I say this, the phone is directing me to turn off at Kingsway. Suddenly I think of my one friend who lives in Footscray, how we marvel at how quick it is, really, to get from St Kilda East to her house, straight over the West Gate, and nowhere near where we are now. I take a quick glance at the map on my phone. It reads directions to Cross Street, Paran. What an idiot I am for discarding the Melways. I tossed it in the recycling bin along with all the other things I'm not supposed to throw in the recycling bin. No, I am not a good person and I am an idiot. My phone is dying and now there's only 60 minutes to her flight leaving, her flight with my then not husband, who may or may not have successfully asked them to hold the plane. Can people even do that? Hold planes? I imagine him standing beneath the nose of the A380, arms stretched wide. That is how much I love him, so much, that nothing about this visualization of him taking the weight of an aircraft in his hands rings untrue. I pull over as soon as we have come off the Kingsway exit. Now we are both sweating. I plug in Cross Street, Footscray, and then search furiously for somewhere to swing an ambitious U-turn. Thankfully, it is late and the traffic is light. The chicken is starting to smell. My phone might die, I say, already mourning the conversation I now won't be able to have with my then not husband right up until the pilot tells the crew to take their seats. She furiously pats her pants, forest green in the dark of the night, squints out the window and says, ooh, like there is a pain in her leg she can't eke out. I really can't see well at night. The phone stays alive just in time. We pull up to an apartment block, 70s orange brick. She slow runs off into the building. I send my then not husband a message. My phone is dying. We are just at her place now. Will they wait? I miss you. He writes back, I've told them. I miss you too. She comes back panting heavily with the passport, a $20 note and an old TomTom GPS system. As we zoom off, she says, I can't pay you much, but I have some money and this TomTom, which I think is missing a cord, but it might not be so hard to replace. She puts the TomTom next to the gear stick and it clunks against my hand as I try to get us as quickly as possible away from Footscray and back on the road to Tullamarine. I do think about taking the money. It's always handy having a note in your back pocket. I tell her to keep all of it because that is what a good person would do, and watch her pack her passport in the front pocket of her backpack, as well as the TomTom, which she will now need to take to China with her. We arrive at the airport. As I heave the big brown suitcase out of the boot, she says to me very quickly, thank you so much. You are a very good person. Gosh, I don't even know your name. That's okay, I say, which I then realize is the wrong thing to say. I'm supposed to tell her my name, but names are not what matter here. And anyway, I've already given so much, haven't I? She rushes inside. I wait for the feeling of having done something good to wash over me, but I just feel irritated, tired, annoyed. I open all the windows. I want the chicken smell to go away. With my last 2%, I ring my then not husband and leave the airport again. Was that nice of me? I ask. Very nice, he says. We're still not boarding. She should make it. Oh, that's good, I say. Do you think I'm a good person? The phone cuts out. Back at home in the half-empty bed and the dog at my feet, my phone turns back on. There's a message there from him. She made it. And then another one. Sleep well, love and miss you. I can't say I wasn't hoping for more praise, more adulation, but he doesn't give it, probably because he's a better person than me, and better people don't need to be made to feel virtuous. They just are. By now, they will be up in the air. Maybe they are sitting near each other. Maybe they are talking about me. I reach over to his side. A lone hair of his is on the pillow, a half-drunk glass of water on the bedside table. I think about who I might tell this story to tomorrow, or would it make me a better person to tell no one? I'll ask him when he lands what he would do.
Oh, I love that story so much, Elise. Like, it just made me think of myself, actually, or all of us. We're all wanting to pretend we're better than we are and wishing, you know, we're more generous than we actually are.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Although now you're telling everybody.
I know, but I held it inside for so long.
How long ago was that, out of interest?
Oh, about 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. I just loved it. I could almost smell the chicken in the car too.
It was really intense, but
I felt irritated about that. Listen, I'll have to let you go in just a moment, but I do want to know about your new novel that you're writing. How is that going, and when is it coming out?
Good question. I'm just currently in probably my second/third draft phase. I don't know when it's coming out. I haven't kind of shown it to many people yet. So I will do that, but I want to get it in really good shape. But it's going well. I actually wrote a lot of it during lockdown last year. So it was a bit of that allowed me to go into another world when we were all trapped in our little domestic spaces. So
yes, absolutely. Nick and I were talking about, director of the festival, we're talking about creativity and whether it happened more in COVID because of that quiet space. Look, Elise, it has been so wonderful to hear that piece and to hear your piece first in our festival. You have just met Elise Esserhurst, Melbourne-based writer and playwright. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Dennis Altman is an author whose most recent book is Unrequited Love, Diary of an Accidental Activist. In August, Scribe will publish his forthcoming book, The Strange Persistence of Monarchies. Can't wait for that one. It's just a great title. He's also Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at La Trobe University. Dennis, it is so lovely to meet you. And can I just say thank you as well for the work you've done over so many decades to forward gay rights. So as the title of your recent book suggests, people will know you from this pioneering activism you've done in the area of gay rights. And you've also been deeply involved with government and community responses to HIV/AIDS in Australia and Asia Pacific for many years. I saw some commentary recently making parallels with the AIDS pandemic and the COVID pandemic, and I just wondered what you, as an expert in this area, thought about that.
Well, I think, Ginger, there are some apparently superficial similarities. Clearly, a new epidemic disease is always going to have certain features. It's going to create fear, it's going to create panic, it's going to create stigma. And we saw that in the attacks early on in Australia, not, I think, to the same extent as in the US, on people of Chinese ancestry, which of course was fostered by President Trump, who kept on referring to the Chinese virus. But I think that the differences are actually greater than the parallels. I mean, although both of them are viral infections, they're very different sorts of viruses. It's meant that we've actually developed vaccines against COVID within a year. This is extraordinary. Back in 1985, the then US Secretary of Health said we're going to have a vaccine against HIV. We still don't have it. I think the other crucial difference is that, at least in rich Western countries like Australia, HIV only affected small, discrete groups of people. And we forget that the first group affected were, in fact, men with haemophilia. most of whom were infected by blood products. Whereas COVID, of course, has affected everybody. And the precautions that we're required to take, and we will all remember the long winter in Melbourne with lockdowns, the social distancing, the masks, is very different because HIV is not easily transmitted. And therefore, in a funny way, it required far less precautions than even now we're required to act or to use against COVID.
It's interesting, Janice. I feel like I could talk to you for an hour about this.
We could.
It's so complex, isn't it? Especially the stigma stuff really interests me. But we are going to change direction completely now. You have written this very short, sharp piece for our event, Fake It Till You Make It. Could we please hear it?
So for many years, I taught courses on American politics, which were assessed by our students. The best comment that I ever received was, Dennis needs to recognise that West Wing is fiction. The West Wing was a 7-series program which ran from 1999 to 2006, telling the story of a fictitious president, Jed Bartlett, and the workings of his senior staffers. Bartlett was a Nobel laureate in economics and an idealised Liberal Democrat, surrounded by loyal staffers willing, as he said once, to jump off a cliff for him. My student was, of course, correct. There was much that was inaccurate about West Wing, especially when it portrayed important foreign policy decisions being made by a couple of exhausted staffers with the assistance of a particularly annoying British ambassador who could have been invented by Peter Sellers. But there was also much that was prescient about the program. In its last series, a hunky Latino candidate, played by Jimmy Smits, was the Democratic nomination, sounding rather like Barack Obama. But even Aaron Sorkin, the legendary creator of the series, could not have imagined a character like Donald Trump. His Republican candidate was an overtly pro-abortion liberal, a species almost extinct within Republican ranks. We used to think that fiction exaggerated reality, but what happens when fiction blurs with our sense of reality and influences how we change the world? It's reported that the British Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, drew on the film Contagion to argue for ordering a far greater number of COVID vaccines that seem necessary. I might just add, it's such a pity Scott Morrison didn't watch Contagion. There is no doubt, wrote novelist Doris Lessing, that fiction makes a better job of the truth. In some ways, West Wing, which straddled the end of the Clinton presidency into most of the Bush years, was fake. Jimmy Smits did not run for office against Alan Alda. But West Wing helped shape how millions of Americans understood politics, and it might well have been a factor in Obama's election in 2008. In 2011, the New York Times reported that the then fledgling government of Myanmar used DVDs of the West Wing episodes to study democracy, not, it appears, very successfully. That we continue to blur the imaginary and the actual is summed up for me in a discussion with a very senior Thai politician who said that pro-democracy demonstrators in Bangkok were watching The Crown to understand how constitutional monarchy could work. We might be irritated by the inaccuracies of that program, which I assume most of us have seen, especially perhaps the portrayal of Bob Hawke, but its basic premises ring true. Another popular Netflix series, Bridgerton, tries to anchor its racially blind casting in the fact that Queen Charlotte, wife to George III, may have had distant African ancestry. Even if that were the case, it certainly did not produce the black aristocracy in 18th century Britain, as Bridgerton suggests. But the falsehood jolts us into recognising the racist underpinnings of the expanding British Empire. We have come to think of fake news as necessarily bad, an invention of Donald Trump and the alt-right. But the line between the real and the imagined is more ambiguous and omnipresent than a simple dichotomy suggests. As Salman Rushdie writes in his magic realist novel Quixote, Reality as we believed it has truly ceased to exist, and our eyes are open to this new and dark revelation of how things may actually be.
Oh, so wonderful, Dennis. Honestly, I love this piece so much, and it brought up so much in my head, especially because I think I said to you previously, I have binge watched West Wing
Yes.
in 2007 when I was in hospital. And it brought back actually a lot of memories of my father being a diplomat and watching a Yes Minister and finding so many things were true in this supposed fiction. I love that quote in there as well from Doris Lessing, you know, that fiction makes a better job of the truth. And I wonder how true you actually think that is.
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, I think that clearly there are facts, and fiction is not necessarily bounded by facts, but there is an underlying sense of how the world works, which fiction often reaches. And of course, fiction often is used as ways of understanding the world. It was interesting, during the Trump years, there was a remarkable revival of interest in George Orwell's Animal Farm in 1984, clearly because people saw that in his imagined worlds, one had a key to understanding what was going on that was probably much more, I'm not quite sure what the term is, it gave people an insight greater than that which one got from watching news television.
Yes.
In that sense,
I think sometimes we know ourselves more in fiction than we do any other way. Dennis, it is such a pleasure to meet you. I'm going to say goodbye now. Professor Dennis Altman is an author, activist, and academic from Melbourne. It's been an honour to meet you, Dennis.
Thank you so much, Ginger. It's been fun.
My next guest is someone we all know. Deborah Conway is a daughter, student, and a performer, musician, songwriter, producer, and an innovator. 26 years ago, she added mother 3 times to her resume as well. In the last 18 months, Deborah Conway has been made a national living legend. She's won the Australia Council Don Banks Music Award, and she was also made an AM in the Australia Day Honours list. Deborah, the talk we are about to hear from you traverses so much ground. You muse upon the state of free speech, what truth means, and later in the show, we're going to hear this wonderful song from you as well, which also touches on some of these issues. But with the speech we're about to hear, the piece you've written for us, there's a lot of talk about truth and also about polarization. So the question I have for you now is, do you think as humans we have lost the ability to disagree?
I think we have stymied it within our own discourse, because many of us are very scared of being ostracized by our communities, and we are increasingly aware because the rules get rewritten daily about what the things are that we can say and what we simply can't. And I think that as that kind of attitude accelerates and the kinds of things that you're allowed to express we become increasingly limited, you are therefore also encouraged to not think. And I think that's where it's getting very, very scary. And I think it's happening all over the place. And I think it's happening in our media and in our politics and in our schools and in the films that we watch and the theatre that we go to, and the culture that we consume. And I really do encourage people to shake off those shackles, that it's not, the whole cancel culture, that everything that has been instituted seems to be in order to control, is a controlling feature. It's something to suppress us. I mean, no one should be frightened to be able to express themselves if they honestly feel that what they're saying comes from a place of heartfelt intent. And, you know, if those ideas aren't good, then somebody else should be able to pounce on them and say, no, these are not good ideas because blah, 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 blah. And that's the way, it's the only way that you defeat bad ideas, is when better ideas come along. And so if you don't allow people to speak their minds, if you threaten them with social ostracization, and you allow this kind of, almost totalitarian quality to creep into our discourse, it doesn't mean that people won't. It basically just it's just. It retards conversation, it retards thought, it retards good ideas, and nobody is better off. And I think we're doing ourselves and our children a huge disservice.
It's so interesting what you're saying, Deborah. I feel like I could spend 2 hours talking about this with you over a cup of tea, but you do talk a lot more about these issues in the talk you've written for us. So let's hear that piece now.
Hello, this is Deborah Conway, and I'm faking it till I make it at Melbourne Jewish Book Week. The idea of truth is messy. Human nature is messy. Being an animal is messy. Nothing is cut and dried, not even birth and death these days. In this digital age, expectations have shifted to expect more clarity, on or off, 0 or 1. But life and the complexity and chaos inherent in it is rendered in the grey areas, not the black and white, the on and off, the zeros and ones. DCN 348 is a little song on a huge topic. I declared myself on the side of truth a long time ago. Easy decision, lying is a skill I have never mastered, except to occasionally convince an audience that I'd rather be on stage than at home lounging in my pyjamas. Mostly I tell the truth, or at least avoid telling an outright lie. Life is a lot less complicated that way, and it's our default position. We don't trust liars, and we don't like being lied to. It seems pointless having a conversation with someone if you're aware that you can't trust anything they say. Of course, we can lie to ourselves, but probably not wittingly. And then there are circumstances when being able to come up with a convincing lie on the spot becomes an admirable skill. I've witnessed a friend who I never thought was capable of such things sit on a couch and tell porkies to mollify a situation, a victimless crime. I have to say I was quietly impressed. Context is everything, though. But ultimate truth only resides in the undeniable, pure mathematics and suffering. In all other arenas, truth is a pliable narrative, or an alternate reading of raw material. In our courts, the circuitous conundrum all parties must navigate to find the heart of truth. In our parliaments, truth is negotiated via the art of compromise. The Fourth Estate is laden with conflicting truth-tellers, competing for our faith in their version of events. Our universities, specifically humanities departments, are divided between partisan truths and ways to view the world across diverse subjects, from literature to geography. Scientific journals are ablaze with opposing interpretations of data, which lead different scientists to claim different truths. And cultural institutions, who curiously appear the least tolerant, accepting only the narrowest version of truth that conforms to what they subscribe to. We tolerate it all, as long as we believe the proclamations are made in good faith. The skill to dominate a debate rests on the body of knowledge you can draw on, and as the old cliche goes, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Truth is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as conformity with fact, agreement with reality. So a person pronouncing what they believe to be the facts with the information at their disposal believes they are speaking truth. But if they hold too strongly to their original position in the face of changing or opposing facts, are they liars, zealots, fantasists, authoritarians clinging to power? How do we convince ourselves of the truth in the face of a whole other set of facts? Can truths transcend time, place, and circumstance? Religion, politics, and cultural practice would indicate otherwise. and social media hand in glove with the ever more ravenous news cycle that has accelerated the fast and loose approach to facts just to get out in front of the next guy, has become the furious engine of the widening political schism. In these crazy days of the dawn of the second decade of the second millennium, we are so divided, we don't even comprehend that there could be a different interpretation of our understanding of the world. Partisan politics have become partisan lives. But the quest to eradicate bad actors and bad motivations taken to its end point always ends in tears. Cast your mind back to George Brandis's being excoriated because of his assertion, everyone has the right to be a bigot. The knee-jerk reaction is to object strenuously, but surely his claim is preferable to having our expression regulated by an all-powerful body, or worse, by an all-powerful bigot. Who can guarantee that the benign body we might hand the right to police our speech and thoughts to stays benign? Human history is littered with these failures. Right now, if you don't like my truth, you can petition to have my public avenues of expression closed. Both sides do it. But the left of the political spectrum has been gleefully brandishing these cudgels for years, starting with universities and now running rampant through media, boardrooms, science labs, sporting arenas, publishing houses and social media accounts. These methods don't win the argument. They just diminish the expanse of differing voices available to be heard. The lists of observations we are forbidden from making are eroding our ability not just to communicate, but to think. The list of people who have fallen afoul of the heterodoxy is exponentially growing. These are murky yet familiar straits we've entered, and no one is any wiser or closer to the truth because of them. I believe free speech, other than incitement to violence, is a universal good. The right to say what you want to say, think what you want to think, regardless of politics, gender, sexuality, race or religion. It's the one right that predicates all other rights. If you don't like someone's hard-fought truth, counter that with your own. Let the ideas battle it out in the sphere of public opinion. The good ideas, values, notions of truth will convince in the end, because they'll be the ones that most accurately reflect reality. It might take time to discover what that reality is, but to shut down the debate and cancel the dissenter won't get closer to the truth. Rather, it will get closer to forced collectivism, which is the shortcut to totalitarianism and bloody violence. We are all swept up in politics, whether we want to be or not. Now more than ever, every decision, view or choice we make has to be viewed through a political prism, no matter how tangential. In my youth, I thought this was a necessary good. Now I think it's an unnecessary distraction. Once there was more to unify us than divide us across our political allegiances, but the vehemence with which we hold our views now and the labels we affix to those we disagree with is an obstacle to truth, not a pathway to it. Offence is taken, not given. And where is all this offence taking leading us? Our younger generations are so highly strung, so anxious and vulnerable, that we have more people in the sway of depression, eating disorders, self-harm and suicidal thoughts than ever before. And all this at a time when human beings have never been healthier, wealthier, better nourished, less likely to die from natural disaster, and with less people living in poverty than ever before. There is nothing to be said in the defence of a full-throated denial of truth, nothing but grief and despair likely to emanate from forced repudiation of reality, nothing but suffering and death associated with long-term demagoguery. The least wretched life is lived when your goal is to aim for truth. I feel lucky to have understood this lesson early. As a preteen, I went to Sunday school at Temple Beth Israel in Alma Road. Every week, we were encouraged to bring a few coins from home to drop into the Jewish National Fund blue box. There was one permanently in the corner of our classroom. My mother generally supplied me with a few coins, but I mostly didn't put them in the blue box. Instead, I went to the local milk bar at recess and bought myself sweets. And foolishly, instead of concealing the evidence by eating it, I hid it in a shoebox at the back of my cupboard. I mean, who would ever think of looking there? I had built up quite an impressive stash by the time I was sprung. Where did these come from? I didn't get pocket money, so no doubt my parents had already figured it out what was going on. I probably attempted to say a friend had given them to me, but I don't think I was convincing. It was a very early lesson for me that I was a terrible liar. It didn't take long for them to break me down. So I was confessing to 1, taking my parents' money under false pretenses, 2, denying the charity their money, 3, buying lollies with the loot, 4, repeat offending. A quadruple whammy. And what was my punishment? My cruel parents left me at home alone under the watchful eye of Linda, the live-in nanny, while they and my sister went for lunch at Grandma's house. I was beyond devastated. I have to say it worked. These days, I rarely eat sweets. I donate to J&F, and I never lie.
Sam Ducker-Jones is an artist and poet from Wellington, New Zealand. His first book of poetry was People from the Pit Stand Up, and it was published by VUP in 2018 to wide acclaim. His second collection is called Party Legend, and it will be published also by VUP in June this year. In 2020, Sam bought a church on the West Coast, which he is turning into a sculpture. I wish I could see that church, Sam. But what I can see is this amazing, beautiful stuff behind you. Can you tell me all about what that is?
Yeah, I in August this year, I'm having a show, and I'm having one wall of the show is going to be all these frames, and in the frames are going to be monoprints of sort of potential love, self-portraits, sort of black static, and then standing before them will be a ceramic sculpture of a man on his phone.
Wonderful. I love your sculptures of little guys, and they're so different. I saw one that I fell in love with. It was a guy smoking, but he was wearing a pink dress with roses on it.
Oh, yeah. 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 They're not little either. They're quite big.
Yes. And so is pink a color that you use a lot in your work?
I just can't get away from it.
Well, I wish I could see your sculptures and your upcoming show in real life. But for now, we've got an amazing poem that you're going to read for us. Can we hear it now? So
this poem is called Party Legend, and it's a pantoum. Vote for me. I'm from a very distinguished flame. I attended school for gifted merchandise, yet this is also an everyman's story. I have a very relatable, familiar, regular story. Sure, I appended a pool of lifted merchandise, and I appear to you now as a velveteen seal pup with enormous bloody teeth, but don't be frightened. I have a very relatable, familiar, regular story. Plus, I understand complex economic systems. I may appear to you now as a velveteen seal pup with an enormous bank account, but don't be fooled. I'm from a tiny Kansas farm atop the Himalayas in the Mexican state of Alice Springs, Bangladesh. I understand complex emotional systems. My mother was my childhood dog, run over before she was born, so don't tell me about sorrow. I grew up on a hay bale propped atop the Himalayas in the Mexican state of Kaikoi, Kazakhstan. The stories are true. I've nothing to hide. My mother was my childhood dog run over before she was born. Lenny Kravitz, Prince, Jimi Hendrix, all fabulous lovers. The stories are true. I've nothing to hide. See how I relate. Prince, Jimi Hendrix, Barack Obama, Scarlett and Frank O'Hara. Poetry and politics are in the blood. See how I relate. Max, my great-great-great-uncle, shtetl heartthrob and political activist, was arrested in 1895, thrown into a Russian jail, and Rose, the aunt on the outside, sang in Yiddish through the bars. Poetry and politics, my darlings, some things are in the blood. Rebellion is in the blood. I may have mentioned Max, arrested in 1895 and thrown into a Russian jail, and Rose, who sang in Yiddish through the bars, and the guards thought, harmless lullaby, but it was actually an escape plan. Folks, I care. Oh my God, I care. Rebellion is in my blood. Send me to jail if you wish, for I believe in many things. I care. Oh my God, I care. I nurture my mythologies as robustly as you shelter yours. Send me to jail if you wish, for I'll believe in anything. But come election day, do consider my singular story. Embrace my mythologies, and I shall acknowledge yours. Vote for me. Blood of Max, jailed for his politics, and of Rose, who broke him out with lullaby. Come election day, do consider my inspiring story. My mother's mother left Russia for America and became the first female pharmacist in New York City. Imagine, Max jailed for his political beliefs and Rose, who broke him out with a lullaby. Then this pharmacy, which before long becomes a front for dealing heroin to the mob. My mother's mother was the first female pharmacist in New York City. These are facts. We have the news clippings. And yes, her pharmacy was a front for dealing heroin to the mob. See this photo of her in a frilly white dress, wide-brimmed hat, and an enormous gun strapped to her side. These are facts. We have the news clippings. What is my point, dear audience? There is the photo of my great-grandmother with an enormous machine gun strapped to her side, but my point is not about organized crime. What is my point? My point is that I come from well-connected and fearless and entrepreneurial stock. My point is not of homogenized time. I have no ghosts. I come from well-connected and fearless and entrepreneurial stock. Justin Trudeau still sends chocolates. See how I shake out the sheets. I have no ghosts. My opponents will argue that the timeline meanders, but I shall fire back. Dorothy Gale has the other half of this locket. See how I shake out the sheets. History is a game of broken telephone. I shall fire back. Plot lines curl and twist, are dropped, picked up later, repurposed or rewritten. Mystery is a game of token xylophone. Edges fray and are mended with new perspective. Plot lines twist and curl, are dropped, picked up later, repurposed or rebitten. What does it matter if there are embellishments? Pledges stray and are blended with blue perspex lids. Who doesn't relish some abstraction now and then? What does it matter if there are embellishments? Homer, the Bible, Lord of the Rings, who doesn't relish a metaphor now and then? If it's good, it might as well count. Homer, the Bible, Harry Potter. I ask you, define reality to your neighbor, and you will each come up with different answers. If it's good, it might as well count. A show of hands, please. How many of you chose the vial of blood over the Stradivarius? Define reality to your neighbor, and you'll each come up with different answers. Did I mention I am so well connected? A show of hands, how many of you chose the Stradivarius over the message in a bottle? It's true. My great uncle Joachim was violinist to the Tsar. Vote for me, I am so well connected. A position I would indeed consider reinstating should I be elected in September is that of my great uncle Joachim, violinist to the Tsar. Ah, but Sam, I hear you say, everyone's Russian great-grandmother was potentially Anastasia. Look, there are positions I would indeed consider reinstating should I be elected. I have the receipts. I didn't want to have to show them, but okay, if you insist, I will bring the receipts. Ah, but Sam, you say, every Hamilton courtier was secretly a Tainui princess. And yes, okay, I hear you. And positively argue that the vote for me is a vote for dreaming in old photographs. Friends, I have the receipts. I guarantee 100% you will not want to miss when I unveil the receipts. Okay, fireside time. Colleagues, country folk, regarding dreaming in these old photographs, remember in the war when I saved your sorry ass? Friends, colleagues, country folk, I'm no hero. But remember in the war when I taught that yoga class? I've had my struggles, you know, with self-esteem. Some call me a hero of humble beginnings. Yes, I've had my struggles. My grandfather was found with his infant siblings beside their dead mother. Humble beginnings. My grandmother was held by the ankle out the window by a wicked woman. My grandfather and his infant siblings gurgling on the kitchen floor beside their dead blind mother. My uncle saved his ice cream so his mother could have a lick. Now he's a real estate tycoon. My grandmother was dangled by the ankle out a window by Philip Pullman. But look at me now. Look at us now. My uncle is a real hate typhoon. My father was nominated for the Best Dream Prize, and my mother is a shaman. Look at us now. My brother really did find treasure on an island, and my sister has the president's number. My father was nominated for a size, and my mother is a ploughman. Vote for me. My brother really did find pleasure of a kind, and my sister is the resident plumber. When I was a child, I drew rainbow-colored orchestras. Vote for me. In the gorgeous lies we wrap around ourselves in order to have one step follow the next. When I was a child, I had a rainbow-colored orchestra. Friends, hands up if you remember your dreams. Art, poetry, such gorgeous, elegant lies that we wrap around ourselves. Vote for me, and I'll insist they count and recount till we win. Friends, sing out if you remember your dreams. Oh, sweet constituents, I love you like you're one of my own numerous and successful daughters. Vote for me, and I'll insist you count and recount till we win. Congratulations, sweet constituents. I love you like you're one of my own very numerous and successful racehorses. We are winners, we have won. We are fabulous winners who have already won. Congratulations. Yes, I am still so very velveteen. We are winners, we have won. We are fabulous winners who have already won, and soon perhaps I shall return to the ocean. Tell me, am I still not very velveteen? My advice, go to bed. Upon waking, write it down. Soon perhaps I shall return to the ocean, that mighty ballot box. Till then, go to bed. Upon waking, write it down. Repeat, I am incredibly wealthy and devastatingly handsome and really good at sports. See you at the ballot box. Remember my everyman story. I am incredibly healthy and devastatingly handy and really good at thoughts. But you know this. I am relatable. I am a very distinguished shame. Vote for me.
Wow, Sam, that was just incredible. I feel like you just put 11 novels worth of story in one poem. There's so much in there. It's amazing. So the line that struck me the most in that piece, both when I read it myself before this recording and when you read it just now, was I've got nothing to hide. And there's another line I love, which is such gorgeous, elegant lies we wrap around ourselves. And I was thinking about the theme of this event being that we're all fake in some way and we're all hiding something. So I want to ask you, how deliberately in your work are you talking about identity and trying to unpick the tapestry of identity?
Yeah, well, I was delighted to get this brief because I like interrogating personal history and the kind of narratives that we make in order to present ourselves in a particular way and have ourselves fit into the little niche of society where we'd like to have ourselves slotted.
Yes.
You know, in New Zealand, and I'm assuming probably in Australia too, there's lots of talk about like re-examining history from an Indigenous perspective instead of just the colonial perspective that most of us learned in school. And I just think that's fascinating that you can kind of take that history, which you just thought was kind of solid, which you're standing on for most of your life, you can pick it up and say, actually, this is way more squishy than you thought it was. And we're going to take all these new perspectives, new old perspectives, and inject it, and you can sort of positively reinvent yourself. Yeah, so that's like a nice thing. But you know, then you wanted to, you were talking about politics and I don't know where I'm going now.
Well, the layers in that poem is what I was thinking about, how you can just keep peeling back the layers of identity and the layers of yourself, and it never ends, really, does it?
No, and that's why I was really decided to use that pantoum form, where it's got those repetitions. You can kind of like, you know, fake it till you make it. If I say it enough times, then maybe I'll believe it, and if I believe it, maybe you'll believe it.
Yes.
But then each time the line is repeated, it's a little bit altered too, because it's
and it feels a little bit more fake as well. So Sam,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was just wonderful to hear. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope that I can join Melbourne Jewish Book Week in person sometime in the
Yes.
future.
We hope so too. You've been listening to Sam Ducker-Jones. He's a talented artist and poet from New Zealand. And wasn't that a delight? Andrea Goldsmith won the Melbourne Prize in 2016 for her 7th novel, The Memory Trap. Her latest novel is Invented Lies, and that one was published in 2019. Now, Andrea, you have written so much over the years, so many wonderful essays, short stories, novels. But your very latest novel, Invented Lies, takes us from Soviet Russia to 1980s Melbourne, which is so interesting because there's no phones and internet and all that stuff. We could spend hours talking about this incredible book, but I just wanted to ask you one thing in the first instance. So to me, as a reader, this book is very political in a way. We are looking through the eyes of the main character, Galina, and also other characters in the book. And you use fiction to talk about the Jewish diaspora, but it also makes us reflect on the way that Australia treats asylum seekers. And my question for you now is, what fiction can bring us as humans?
I think it's a really fundamental question. I actually believe that fiction readers have more empathy than other people. In fact, Scott Morrison should perhaps read fiction rather than go into empathy courses. That what fiction does is it provides a way into the hearts and minds of people who are not yourself and not having experiences that you might be having, or indeed can shed light on experiences you're having. And when it comes to Invented Lives, I wanted to talk about exile. I wanted to talk about, I wanted to explore the notion that nobody chooses exile, which is something perhaps in 2022 that we've actually, or 2021, wherever we are now, that we've actually forgotten. And what fiction can do is it can move events away from us. And it's interesting that when it shifted away, and in this case, in the case of Invented Lives, it was shifted to the 1980s, we get a clearer perspective on what's going on now.
Yes, it really made me think so much about all sorts of things, about love, about compassion, about isolation. But I think you're absolutely right, Andrea. In fact, I've read research, academic research, to say that readers of fiction are more empathetic. And I think that's because you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and often quite foreign feelings, people's situations that you've never encountered in your life and may never encounter. Now,
Can I just say, the interesting thing about putting yourself into other people's shoes through fiction is that you can do it safely. And one of the problems that we have in this day and age is too often we fear the other. But in fiction, you are brought close to the other and you can understand the world through the point of view of the other. And it's a safe way of explosive learning.
Yes, it makes me actually wonder if fiction writers are also more empathetic, but we can't get into that now. I am going to ask you a couple more questions after your reading, but I would love to hear this absolutely spectacular piece you've written for us under the banner of our event, Fake It Until You Make It.
Cleo, goddess of poetry and epic fiction, surveyed the fake room from her office on the mezzanine floor. It was Thursday, and the fake room was already crowded. She anticipated an uncomfortable crush come Sunday, just before the room was emptied out in preparation for the new week. How times had changed. At this rate, there might need to be 2 cleanouts a week, a situation unknown and unimaginable throughout the entire history of humankind. Cleo thought fondly of the days when weeks could go by with scant occupancy of the fake room, allowing her to get on with her own epic poetry. And when people did come in, such a different type of man from the current crop. She remembered Clinton, who did have sexual relations with Monica, the charm of the man. It wouldn't have been out of the question that she, Cleo, would have engaged in a bit of canoodling herself. And Hawkeye, who did not give up booze and Blanche, despite what he said, she always looked forward to his visits to the fake room. Caesar had been a favourite, and a Byron week was never a disappointment. And Bello, well, despite his 5 marriages, or perhaps because of them, he was a man to love. The fake room is actually the room for liars, but fake sounds so much more benign than liar. As the muse of epic poetry and fiction, Cleo is, in a very real sense, mistress of the word, but she does report to a higher authority. But if left to her, she'd be calling a spade a spade. But don't be fooled. In the contemporary area, fake is most certainly a synonym for lie and liar. From her cubby, she surveyed the current rabble. All the usuals were there. Indeed, they might as well change their address permanently. Trump, formerly of the White House, was chanting, "Make me great again," while he negotiated with Putin for a new Trump Towers in St. Petersburg and his return to the White House in 2024. Or perhaps Don Jr., he said, with that particular pursing of the lips which reminded Cleo of porn films. Boris was covering sheets of paper with pithy slogans to replace "Get Brexit Done," given Brexit was done on paper at least. He shouted out each possibility and gauged the response. "Make Britain great again," he said. Trump glared. "Better than French," Le Pen glared. "British beer for the Krauts." In the absence of a German, the Austrian Freedom Party leader Norbert Hofer glared. While Boris pursued his next pithy statement, Scott Morrison was putting his hopes in thoughts and prayers as he juggled "How good is coal?" with "How good is gas?" with "How good am I?" None of the internationals took any notice, but that didn't bother him. Seems Nero Morrison lacks more than the empathy gene. In fact, Scott doesn't care about the opinion of the rest of the world. They don't vote in Australian elections. And as a marketing man, he knows the importance of identifying the target audience and feeding them what they need to hear. With his handling of COVID, he had the Australian people on side, and how good was that? But now, with the vaccine rollout, he's struggling, and the recent spate of sexual accusations is sorely testing him. Jen is doing her best to help him understand. Imagine it's our daughter, darling. But his recent obfuscation about what he knew and when he knew it, coupled with the vaccine fiasco, has, in recent weeks, given him a permanent seat in the fake room. Cleo again found her thoughts returning to the old days. The company was extremely good back then, and she was happy to leave her desk and mingle with the throng. Aristophanes, Lenny Bernstein, Rilke, Dante. This is a men's club, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly. And it would seem that every man has at least one whopper in him. But today's rabble is all mindless, narcissistic fakery, and there's no charm nor engagement in that. And the dearth of originality in their lives beggars belief, although belief itself, belief based on sound research, seems to have lost favour. For these men with their cravings for power, no lie is too bombastic, no conspiracy theory too bizarre. What strikes her as extraordinary is the greatest lie of all. So many of these men have pledged themselves to public service, yet they don't give a damn about the public. In the modern era, the fake room requires so much work. Back in the old days, emerging from some excellent conversations, her own fiction and poetry progressed through the pens of Dostoevsky and Dante, her fellow countrymen, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and many other notable luminaries. Eleanor Roosevelt came a couple of times, the incomparable Eleanor, and how Cleo wished she'd come to stay more often. Fortunately, when Eleanor did spend time in the fake room, it was that issue with the girlfriend. It was not during the same weeks as her husband. Ted Hughes, Philip Roth, Joan of Arc, the list goes on. These days, though, the goodies have mostly been forced out. And the dramas and highlights of the old days, there were some doozies. Like the time Plato lobbied ex post facto to get Homer a prolonged stay in the fake room for certain fabrications in the Iliad. No anachronism here, as time is not linear in the fake room. Plato failed, but it took all Cleo's ingenuity to get him to back down. Plato was not a good listener. He preferred to orchestrate all dialogue, making him a hard man to convince, and Cleo's being a woman certainly didn't help. You'll recall not a single woman participated in his symposium. Fortunately, though, being a woman, Cleo's reason was tempered with patience, and she brought him round in the end. One day, during the COVID lockdown, when truth-telling one would think was more important than ever, and yet the fake room was so full that social distancing was impossible, Cleo was watching the boys playing Mine is More Powerful Than Yours, and gradually it dawned on her that there was a way of stopping them, of restoring this place to what it once was. The solution had been staring her in the face. Cleo, the muse of poetry and epic fiction, had always known about the power of fiction to expose, illuminate, and generally bear truths. It was time to act. From that moment on, apart from marking the role, Cleo left the fake room occupants to look after themselves. These guys were never going to make it, not if her plan worked. For several months, she lived on coffee and Red Bull while she wrote and revised, read and reread. When satisfied with her work, she sent the manuscript, quite a hefty tome, to her agent, who had been waiting millennia for it. The Boys Laid Bare, a novel by Hannah Luxemburg, was published simultaneously in a dozen territories throughout the world. The media for The Boys Laid Bare was Trump-sized. The book was an overnight sensation. The revelations fueled conversations across the globe. Hannah Luxemburg, it seemed, had come out of nowhere, but appears she did. Immediately, the fixers, the lobbyists, the official spy agencies, the mum and dad conspiracy spooks got to work, striving to outdo one another in uncovering the author's dirt, to do unto her as she had done in The Boys Laid Bare. Because dirt there must be. Politically speaking, there's always dirt. And when they found no dirt, they faked dirt. But Cleo was the woman who had talked Plato around, so these guys didn't stand a chance. After millennia of managing the fake room, Cleo knows more about faking it than the fakers. She knows that you can fake it all you like, but that's not the way to make it. No, not at all. Call her old-fashioned, but Cleo is a gal wedded to honesty, and she knows there's nothing like fiction to reveal the truth.
Wow. It's such a wonderful piece, Andrea. It was such a magical vision as well. All these lies and fakes in one room, presided over by Cleo, Muse of Poetry and History. And I also did love, there was a line in there where you described Scott Morrison as Nero Morrison after the tyrannical 5th Roman emperor. There was one line in that piece that really struck me in the heart near the end. You said, fiction has a covenant with the truth, so it's somehow fake and real at the same time. And I wonder if you could reflect on that for me.
Because fiction is fiction, fiction is made up. It becomes, well, certainly my fiction is. I mean, I don't write from my own experience, but what is autobiographical in my fiction and many other people's fiction is the ideas that the fiction explores. I'm not going to spend 4 years on writing a novel that explores ideas that don't interest me, that I don't want to know more about. So what actually happens is fiction, I do think fiction does have I think it's a superb vehicle for the truth. Because what you can do is you can take an idea like exile, like compassion, like how do we embrace others that are different? Why is it that we fear the unknown? You can take ideas like this, and through fiction, you can explore from multiple points of view. And that's the whole beauty and power of character. So I often have characters in my novels that are unappealing, that many readers would disagree with their views, but I can write from their point of view, the character's point of view, and we can see things from a point of view that is not our own. So you are exposed to a number of different truths, if you like, that then make up a body of understanding about a particular issue. Fiction does this. Non-fiction has got to justify itself all the way along. I think that non-fiction and fiction do different things. They do overlap at times. I don't think they're in competition with each other at all. And that's good. But what we as fiction have is we have made up characters. And the characters have got to do the work for you. And if they don't, then you have to give them a personality change so that they do.
And you often, I find with fiction, when you're reading fiction, come face to face with yourself in really unexpected ways. I feel like I could just keep going and asking you so many questions because I'm such a chatterbox and I'm so curious. And one of the other things I love, Andrea, about your work is just your sense of place, the way that you write about Melbourne. But unfortunately, we'll have to let you go now. But thank you so much, Andrea. It's just a joy to be in your company, even though it's over Zoom.
Thank you, Ginger. It's been a pleasure doing this. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, I read your piece 3 times and every single time I kept finding new pathways in it. I've been speaking with novelist, essayist and short story writer Andrea Goldsmith. What an amazing piece that was. My next guest hails from the United Kingdom. Josh Cohen is a psychoanalyst, academic and writer at Goldsmiths, University of London. He is the author of many books and articles, including The Private Life, Not Working, and most recently, How to Live, What to Do. Sounds like advice that we all need. Josh, it is so lovely to meet you, even though it's over the internet.
Lovely to meet you as well, Ginger. Yeah.
Now, Josh, I was looking out to see if you were compact and subtly scruffy because I read that about you in the New Statesman, and you do kind of live up to that form a little bit.
I'm glad to hear it. I was very flattered by the description.
So before we hear the piece that you've written for Fake It Until You Make It, which is our big gala event, I've got a little confession to make to you. So I was at the gym recently and I was listening to the audio version of your book, Not Working. And I had this big laugh in the middle of the gym. I'm sure I looked bonkers because I was essentially listening to something and cackling out loud. But basically what was happening was I was doing exactly what you were suggesting was a modern disease in your book. So I was partaking in a leisure activity in a work-like way. I was smashing in this gym session and going really hard. And then I was also cramming for this recording right now. And I was treating my leisure like work and also doing work while essentially trying to get in this gym session. So I wondered how that book that came out in 2019 had been received by the public and if you had lots of guilty takers like me.
Thanks, Ginger. I mean, that is really glorious. I love the image of you listening to this kind of book, which is urging you to slow down and stare out the window in this very febrile kind of inner atmosphere of you know, pumping your way through a gym session. But yeah, I did hear, I didn't hear any quite as sort of bang on ironic as that. But I did hear some very good stories about people sort of cramming their reading of this book into a busy schedule and suddenly realizing that it was sort of providing a running commentary on what they were doing with their daily lives. So the reception was very much in terms of, on the one hand, this really made me stop and think about what I was doing. It seems such an obvious notion that you would have to sit down and stop. And yet it also made me realize how naturalized the idea of not stopping has become for me, how the idea of sitting it out for an hour has become really alien. And one of the nice sort of extensions of that was that when I spoke to people, either in a kind of official context, like doing events like this, or else just having conversations about it, what people would often get to rather too quickly was, but what do we do about this? And of course, the whole book really is about trying to wean us off the tyranny of action, of saying, before we've said anything else, but what do we do about this? So I would just try gently to point them to the way in which talking about what you do about this is exactly what the book is trying to talk about not doing.
Yeah, let's not do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not do anything about it. And that, of course, is what you do about it.
But you know what, Josh? It really did make me think about the amount of times I either say or write to someone, I'm so busy. I'm sorry I haven't emailed you back. I'm so busy. I'm busy doing this. I'm busy doing that. Like trying to sell myself as a good person somehow through my busyness, which is ridiculous, actually, isn't it?
The moralizing of busyness is something that really fascinates me. And I wonder, you know, I mean, I suppose I spent a lot of time wondering in the book about its possible origins. It obviously has quite a long and complicated history, but, you know, it has a religious history in particular, I think. The idea with the 7 deadly sins and putting sort of sloth among them. I mean, medieval theologians used to name sloth as really the gateway sin, because sloth is what opened you up to all the other terrible things. Once you were no longer vigilant, once you were no longer policing your own body in a kind of wakeful, active way, anything could happen to you, any temptation could befall you. So I think that's partly what it is. And of course, we have this secularized version of that now. We don't have the fear of God, most of us, about not doing enough. But we have the fear of bosses and peers, all these substitute gods that make us very, very worried. And as you say, very kind of shamed.
What I also thought, though, was as a creative person, we know that actually the best ideas form when there's space and air around things. And it really made me think about that. If for no other reason I need to slow down, it should be that in fact, the best things come to you, not in the frantic, frenetic pace of life.
Yeah. And, you know, when you're under a deadline, I mean, if you're at a certain point in the work, a deadline can, of course, be quite generative. But if you're at the beginning of something and you're thinking about a deadline and you're trying to sort of push something out of yourself, for me, that's the definition of hell. Sort of feeling a pressure to create something when there's nothing internally which is kind of nurturing that process. And so when I feel myself doing that, when I feel myself sort of, you know, at my computer, trying to sort of spark inspiration in myself, I know I need to get away.
Absolutely. Look, I could continue talking about this forever, but I'm going to change direction slightly. And on the subject of a spark of inspiration, you've written the most beautiful piece for us. Let's hear the piece first, and then we're going to have a little chat about it.
So here's the piece. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, A Reckoning. London, a hot July morning, the early 90s. The family home is bursting with aimless young people wasting their summers. My Canadian cousin S, permanently folded into her dimpled smile. Her friend D, redhead, pale, alarmingly thin and acutely asthmatic, a fragile Jamesian heiress without the fortune. We're sitting at the breakfast bar when my best friend Jay, over from New York, bounces into the kitchen, a coiled spring ever ready to release himself into some unpredictable choreography of words and movement. Dude, check this out. His voice is soft with mischief. He's leaning into the box on the counter containing the cereal D is now languidly spooning as though breakfast is just another burden she must bear. Jay's smiling eye, dazzlingly collusive, slightly mad, beams into mine. His finger taps a picture on the back of the box. Cinnamon toast as depicted by an imaginary corporate child. He reads the caption above slowly. Tastes just like homemade cinnamon toast. We are both grad students in cultural theory. Late at night, we have stalked the streets of global cities and campus towns, drunkenly composing lectures by French theorists. Derrida on Beavis and Butthead. Butthead's arrival is always now, always belated. Sixou on Crocodile Dundee. Dundee's secret is he himself, is the Sheila he abjects. He is infinite flow of Sheila. This picture and its caption are catnip. J addresses D. Does it? Does it taste just like homemade cinnamon toast? D looks up at him, wide-eyed, a little fearful. What's the right answer? He doesn't wait for her response, just draws our gaze back to the box. Does this look like a slice of homemade cinnamon toast? He turns to me, passing the invisible relay baton. I raise my finger mock sagely in the air. Oh, a simulacrum of a slice of homemade cinnamon toast. Homemade cinnamon toast, but home is everywhere. Home is nowhere. Underneath our deadpan gravity, the hilarity is building. S is smiling, as always, only more widely, her head turning busily from D to me to D. Home is a reproduction. But what's it reproducing? I stage whisper with the confected wonder of a children's magician about to pull out the rabbit. Authenticity, that which cannot be reproduced. The cinnamon toast that can be made only at home, that taps into our deepest longings for a lost childhood. The laughter is now unleashed because childhood is lost. Involuntary pause to recover breath before he expires on the spot. Childhood is always already lost. My cousin, her smile now a little strained, her neck now turning between Dee and me with a subtle but undeniable increase in urgency. I'm enjoying myself too much to ask why. The uniquely naive handwork of the child as anonymous digital effect. Jay is banging the counter now. Are they simulating the homemade? No! The homemade has always been a simulation. Is your cereal fake? No! How can it be? There is no reality for it to fake. We both know that we both know exactly where we're going with this. You know, later we should make some cinnamon toast with fresh bread and butter and cinnamon sugar. We totally should. Jay turns to Dee, arms stretched out triumphantly. And how would it taste? Come on, it would taste. And now we chime in loud, rousing chorus. It would taste just like homemade cinnamon toast. And that is it. We can finally let the laughter take us over like some Dionysian possession. Our eyes shut tight, our bodies crumpled on the kitchen floor. When I surface a minute later, pumping out the last gasps of hysteria, I can hear S repeating the same word, a doubtful smile in her voice. Guys? Guys? So I recover my full height and open my eyes, and in front of me is Dee, still, staring into the bowl. From behind her John Lennon glasses, tears stream freely, like the vengeance of reality itself, into the sugar-dusted milk.
Wow, thank you, Josh. So this is such an interesting piece because it can be read on a number of levels. What I think is quite interesting is we think it's a lark until we realize Dee's crying, and that in fact this has been a level of harassment. And I wonder how much this has been inspired by recent events, both in the United Kingdom, but in Australia, in terms of misogyny and the way that this is playing out in the public sphere.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I wanted to think, of course, about the theme of faking it, but I was thinking about its intersection with all these issues that we're discussing at the moment around masculinity and the way it's really brought into being. As a young man of that age, I would never have thought of myself as toxic or harassing. I would never have thought of myself as laddishly sort of, you know, running after girls to make them, to shame them or upset them, or make them feel small or violated. All of that would have felt like anathema because I was interested in these issues. I read feminism. I was different. And yet I realized that there was a way of inhabiting my masculinity that I had sort of imbibed, sort of osmotically, that the way that I was horsing around with my best friend, which I thought was kind of innocent and charming, was aggressive. And so there is a kind of perceptual journey in the story where this young woman is kind of tiresome and joyless to me. And it's only at the last minute that I realized that, yes, she is fragile, and not in a way that is comical, not in a way that I can just sort of dismiss by seeing it through the lens of a fictional character, but in a way that is real, and that sort of had the effect, I think at the time, certainly now, of turning the shame back on me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You didn't let her take up space in that situation. She was completely run roughshod over, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And it's such a tiny incident in a sort of way, but what we're seeing at the moment is this outpouring of expression by women of the scale of these incidences, because women aren't experiencing them once or twice in a lifetime. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, which make up your daily life. So it's very interesting to reflect on, here's one tiny moment and what happens when we magnify that by thousands and thousands of these experiences, obviously of all levels of aggression. But there's not a woman I know that hasn't had an experience of that kind of male aggression.
Yeah.
At least once, but probably many times in her lifetime.
Yeah. And actually, I think there probably isn't a man I know who hasn't sort of mobilized his masculinity in that way without having a clue what he was doing. Having just sort of lived it in a way that seemed to him to just be what he did.
Yes, I actually host a podcast and we were discussing the historical roots of masculine norms and toxic masculinity, and how essentially it's almost like cultural DNA that you inherit. And you inherit it from newspapers, you inherit it from movies, you inherit it from your family, from schools. It's everywhere. So it's actually, we're living in a sea of it, and it's very hard to recognize it. But it's interesting to me because that obviously happened in your 20s, didn't it? Or when you were a young man. So why has it popped into your head right now to write about?
I think obviously because of what's happening. Because of a climate in which we're all being asked, I think, to examine ourselves, to reflect on our own histories as men and women dealing with one another, relating to one another, and thinking, what has that been? Can I get away with just painting myself as the good guy? What's at stake in trying to do that? You can also go the other direction and make a kind of pious confession in which you just call yourself a terrible person who, has had a kind of Damascene conversion. And I think that's unhelpful too, because it's also a kind of refusal to think about it. It's a sort of performative U-turn. And so what I'm trying to do here is say, the problem here is that we enjoyed this too much. We liked it. I was trying to think about this scene, and one of the things that made it vivid for me is just trying to imagine and not being able to imagine a simple reversal in which, the two girls were horsing around and the boys were sitting meekly at the breakfast bar.
It's a lack of empathy, though, isn't it? And this is a kind of real life trolling. Obviously, that's where my expertise lies, but it reminds me very much of the way that young white men in particular pile on to all sorts of people, but mostly people that they consider other. So women, people of color, people with disabilities, people in the LGBTI community, they all get piled onto. Let me ask you another question before I let you go. This seems like a watershed moment, and I know that you have a philosophy background, so I'm interested in whether you think that we as humans will take this in and really think about it, and we will see genuine structural change.
Wow. I would like to think that we will. But I think genuine structural change is also uneven and also incomplete. So I don't see a utopian horizon in which men are relating to women with a sensibility of equality and respect that is consistent and sustained. But I do think that men will be forced into being more alive to the way that they think about themselves as men, and the way they talk to and are around women.
I
and
really
with
hope
each
you're
other as
right.
well. Yeah, so do I.
Josh, thank you so much. It's been such
Thank
a pleasure
you.
to hear your piece and having the opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Ginger.
Dr. Gigi Fenster is an award-winning writer of both fiction and non-fiction. She studied law before turning to writing and currently teaches law and creative writing. Gigi grew up in South Africa, although she now resides in what is one of my favourite cities in the world, Wellington. And actually, I was born in Wellington, Gigi, so I'm a little bit biased. Now, Gigi, I'm halfway through your terrific book, Feverish, and it came out in 2018. And it just traverses so much ground. You're asking these questions about bravery, vulnerability, transgression, the value we place on art, and so much more. And what intrigues me about your writing is that you do it in this incredibly naked style. I just wonder how deliberate that is.
Yeah, I mean, I get, well, I like to think everything is deliberate, because I think my writers perhaps is to be deliberate. Having said that, I do think that my writing voice is quite close to my speaking voice. And actually, I've just recently finished, been working on a work of fiction, which is going to come out later this year, which is written in first person in the voice of somebody else. And I really, really struggled with that. I really struggled to get somebody else's voice, because my own voice keeps kind of, pushing its way in. So with Feverish, because it has a sort of memoir quality, I think that I had a certain license to use my own voice.
It's
and
beautiful.
I just sort of put it on steroids, I guess.
I mean, I actually can't put it down. You know, those books where you don't want to get the doorbell and you don't want to cook dinner. So congratulations. The piece you've written for this event, Fake It Till You Make It, is actually in this really same elegant, forthright style. And I wonder if we could please hear it.
Kia ora, Ginger. And before I start, I'd just like to also say kia ora to the Melbourne Jewish Book Week for this fantastic event and wonderful opportunity. So I'm going to tell a story about something that happened recently when my partner moved in with me. And if you're looking at me and thinking, aren't you a bit kind of old for your partner to be moving in? Well, yes, and that's why this is a story. Because when you move in together at our age, you have children and you have friends and jobs and furniture and satskas, and these must all be accommodated. And there were hitches, but a few hitches notwithstanding, we managed to accommodate them, and we were feeling pretty smug. And then it came to the pets. So he has 2 cats. His mother, who lived far away in his old country, gave them to his children at a time when children need a pet, and when a grandmother who's far away needs to reach across the water and give her grandchildren something soft and warm with a beating heart. I have 1 cat, Miss Patty Smith, who was named by and inherited from my daughter. And I'm sure you know the story. Teenager is desperate for pet. Teenager gets pet, loves and adores pet. Teenager moves out of home. You have 1 pet, the richer. And then teenager comes home every now and then and says, she's putting on weight. What are you feeding her? When last did you take her to the vet? So I bitch about being saddled with this cat, and I make jokes about, how often does a cat need to go to the vet? But truth be told, there were times when I came home to an empty house, and when Miss Patty Smith was the only one there to greet me with soft and warm and with a beating heart. So we picked a date weeks in advance for the move, and we used those weeks widely. We researched, we Googled, my God, did we Google? We watched YouTube videos, we got books from the library. We watched so many Jackson Galaxy videos that we started to notice when he put on weight. We got second opinions on his views. And then eventually we got his book from the library and we followed his instructions to the letter. So first of all, we divided the house in two with an opaque tarpaulin divider. We created 2 base camps, each with its own litter tray, feeding station, water station, sleeping area, play area. We declared certain objects transitional objects, and we moved them from place to place in the house. Then we changed the opaque barrier into a movable chicken mesh barrier, at which point we got into arguments. I accused him of being obsessive about his cat. He said pot kettle, and so it went. And we lived like that for 2 weeks. And then at the end of 2 weeks, we removed the barriers to let the cats walk freely, and it worked. So the cats moved freely and everybody was happy. I was really not happy. The cats started waltzing about the house like they owned the place. They started leaving their hairs all over the furniture. One of them was sleeping on my bed. One of them was lying in the sunny spot that my cat likes to lie on. One of them was scratching her scratch tray. Their food smelled funny. They were messy eaters. One of them tends to vomit. I complained about it. I said, Patty doesn't come in the house anymore. When last did you hear her meowing? Why is she sleeping in the spare room? He said, you're obsessive about that cat. I said, people in glass houses. I was feeling put upon. Those cats were taking advantage. They were changing the whole mood of the place. So one night he went out and I made sure that Patty was in the house. And then I put his cats outside and I closed the door. I did it again the next night and the night after that, and it was raining. I made a habit of it. I kept a stash of food in my office and I gave it to Patty. My daughter came to visit. She said, Patty's put on weight. I said, you always say that. And she said, no, really, look at her. I knew what I was doing and I knew it wasn't nice. I told a friend. She said, well, you don't love them like your own. You just don't love them. They're not your own and you don't love them like your own. She said it to comfort me, but it made me feel worse. Because honestly, we never love anyone like our own. But that shouldn't stop us from caring, or if we can't care, at least pretending to care. So when I first started thinking about this piece, there were almost 10,000 children in the custody of US Border Patrol agencies. Hundreds of those are under the age of 12 years old. A few weeks ago, Australia deported a 15-year-old unaccompanied minor on a plane of deportees that your Minister of Home Affairs, Peter Dunn, described as putting out the trash. There are over a million Syrian children currently living in refugee camps. UNICEF says there are nearly 50 million child refugees in the world, calling it the worst refugee crisis since the end of the war. We don't love them like our own. Oh, and actually, before going further, New Zealand hasn't taken anywhere near its quota of full quota of refugees in ages. So like I say, we don't love them like our own, but that's no excuse. We can care, or at least pretend to care. I pretended. I behaved towards those cats as if I loved them. When Fleur vomited, I said, oh, you poor little thing, in a soft, gentle voice. I moved my leg so that Jasper could sleep on the bed. And a few nights ago, my partner went out and there was rain coming, so he closed the door. I looked out and it was getting dark and I saw Jasper and I ran to open the door. I ran to open it before the rain came.
Oh, such a wonderful story. And I love this piece so much. I love it because obviously I'm someone who's passionate about refugees as well, but it reminds me so much of what I'm going through because I, in older age, also have a new partner. And
I wish you all the best.
Well, you know, it was making me think we're more brittle as we age in a kind of way, but we're perhaps more wise as we get older, more forgiving. Yeah. Maybe, and
more honest.
Hopefully, if we are our best selves, Gigi, do you think? You know, I was thinking about so much of your work and this piece as well, and how interested you are in empathy and compassion. And I wanted to ask you why that's so important to you.
I think, well, a lot of it, I think, as all with these things, has to do with one's upbringing. And I do canvas this somewhat in the book. So I was brought up in quite a large family. My father was a psychiatrist, and I think that large family and psychiatrist really teaches one the importance of trying not to be judgmental. Trying not to be judgmental and trying to, to empathize with others, and to try to put oneself in the position of others, which of course is really hard. And actually, I read something recently, and I wish I could remember who it was by, who said, it's all very well to say you're going to put yourself walk in someone else's shoes, but we have to remember there's somebody walking in there already, so we can try and live in someone else's brain, but there's somebody living in there already. I'm not sure, but it is something that I'm interested, try to think about. Yeah.
Yes. And I have been doing the same in my work, Gigi. I've come to what I didn't even know what it was until I wrote my book, but radical empathy, where you're basically trying to come to things open-hearted, not necessarily to change your mind, but just trying to really listen and understand, why is someone else actually like this? Why are they behaving like that? Why do they believe these things? If only we could bring this to the refugee crisis. I wish we could bring more empathy. Thank you so much, Gigi. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I know it's on Zoom, but hopefully one day we'll get to meet in real life.
Oh, thank you so much.
Now you are in for a real treat. Australian singer-songwriter and guitarist Deborah Conway, who we heard from a little bit earlier, has recorded her song DCN number 348, especially for us tonight. And you might have heard her say that this was a little song on a huge topic. So let's hear it.
It was clear, it was bright, it was a shining star in a black, black night. It was pure, it was plain, it was a weird, wild party, but nobody came. It was my blood, it was your sweat, it was a waterfall of tears when no one gets wet. It isn't in the news or any magazine. It won't turn a profit or make your toilet clean. It's not something you can see or something you can buy. It's very nice to swallow when all you fed are lies. What is this stuff? This gourmet stuff? This powerful, magical, illicit stuff? It's the truth. Maybe if we told it to our children, they could tell theirs.
What a gorgeous note to end on. And thank you so much to Deborah. And frankly, what an event. Thank you so much to you for your company as well. I hope you have enjoyed tonight as much as I have enjoyed being part of it. Thank you also so much to Melbourne Jewish Book Week and the whole team who put this together.
Ginger, thank you very much for that. But most importantly, thank you so much for being the perfect MC. I can't tell you how much joy it's been working with you on this over the past few weeks, and your enthusiasm, your passion, dare I say, your fangirlism shone brightly tonight. Look, this event, as you said, did take some planning and work to pull off. It was a true team effort. But I particularly want to thank our General Manager, Lisa, for her management of the whole project. Flawless management, as always. Connor for his phenomenal editing of what was not an easy a job to do. So many speakers recorded at so many different times. And the programming committees, especially Janine and Tully and Bram, for their original choice of artists. What a job they did. We should probably also thank your wardrobe artists for your many different change of clothes, change of wardrobe throughout. On that note, on behalf of Ginger and myself, thank you so much for joining us. Good night, and please subscribe to Melbourne Jewish Book Week if you haven't already, via our website, so that you keep informed of all our upcoming events. Good night, and thank you again.